In the news tonight, His Majesty the King leaves on a working trip to Kazakhstan, where he will take part in the Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions. Jordan celebrates the anniversaries of independence, His Majesty the King's coronation, Army Day, and the Great Arab Revolt. And a coalition of Syrian rebels seizes more territory from government forces. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. His Majesty the King left on a working visit to the Republic of Kazakhstan at the invitation of Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev. The King Abdullah will take part in the 5th Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions, which will be held in the Kazakh capital Astana. The King will deliver a speech at the conference and will hold talks with President Nursultan Nazarbayev and Prime Minister Karim Masimov. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein was sworn in as regent in the presence of the cabinet. Jordan celebrated the anniversaries of independence, His Majesty the King's coronation, Army Day, and the Great Arab Revolt. King Abdullah received cabled of good wishes from world leaders, senior local officials, and public figures on the national occasions. This report has more on the national celebrations.
Jordan is celebrating several national occasions with military parades and other ceremonies held nationwide. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army, accompanied by His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein, led a military celebration on the anniversaries of Independence Day, the King's coronation, the Great Arab Revolt, and Army Day. Upon arrival at the site, His Majesty was greeted by the King's Advisor for Military Affairs and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mash'al al-Zaban, and senior army officers. A number of royal family members and senior civic and military officials joined the ceremony, in which the Hashemite flag was the first to enter the venue, among other banners. The Hashemite flag, which derives its color and motto from the symbolism of the Great Arab Revolt that upholds Arab unity, freedom, and dignity, was handed by the King to the armed forces at a major ceremony yesterday. In a speech during today's ceremony, Zaban said the Jordan Armed Forces had always been the defender of pan-Arab causes and had fought in every battle, particularly in defense of the brethren in Palestine. Wherever you look, he told the audience, you will see that our army had stood with unwavering support for Arab neighbors, praising the army as the protectors of Arab dignity and bearers of the true Islamic message since the foundation of the Jordanian state. Towards the end of the ceremony, King Abdullah decorated a number of officers and military officials for their outstanding service. Among those honored were Colonel Muhammad al-Raggad and Major Samah al-Tawalbi for their contributions in the health field. His Majesty also conferred medals upon the parents of 2 martyr pilots, Colonel Ibrahim Hassoune and Captain Muad al-Kasasbe, in honor of their sacrifices in the line of duty. Celebrating the Great Arab Revolt and Army Day, Jordanians recall its legacy and mission of liberty, justice, acceptance, and human dignity. The revolt was launched by Sharif Hussein bin Ali of Mecca in 1916 with the aim of securing independence from the ruling Ottoman Turks and creating a single unified Arab state. Jordanians, seeking to maintain the principles of citizenship that unite them, have established the state in consensus and harmony, irrespective of their backgrounds and origins. The country's army is the standard bearer of the Great Arab Revolt, having clinched its independence, defended Arab rights and just causes, and sought to maximize national achievements. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
Syrian rebels captured a major base from government forces in the south of the country in a new setback for President Bashar al-Assad after recent losses elsewhere. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a British-based monitoring group, said a nearby town and a village in the Dir'a province had fallen to the Free Syrian Army rebels in addition to the base. A spokesman to the Southern Front Alliance of Rebels group said Liwa 52, or the 52nd Brigade, is one of the biggest Syrian army bases in eastern Dir'a. In northern Syria, thousands of people crossed into Turkey to flee clashes that erupted between Daesh group and Kurdish and opposition forces. U.S. President Barack Obama has approved a plan to deploy up to 450 additional military personnel to a base in Iraq's Anbar province. Their mission is to train and advise Iraqi forces fighting Daesh militants. The White House also said the president ordered the expedited delivery for essentials equipment and material to Iraqi forces, including Peshmerga and tribal fighters operating under Iraqi command. In Baghdad, Iraq's defense minister Khalid al-Abedi met the chief of the United States Central Command, Lloyd Austin. Iraq's defense ministry said the meeting was to discuss the readiness of the armed forces and the plans for the liberation of the cities of Anbar and Mosul from Daesh militants. As the American general visited Baghdad, bomb attacks killed 8 people in and around the Iraqi capital, and U.S.-led coalition warplanes targeted Daesh militants. Police said a suicide bomber in a car killed 5 civilians in the Shula neighborhood and wounded 15 other people. Hours earlier, a roadside bomb exploded on a commercial street in Al-Mahmudiyya district just south of the capital, killing 3 civilians and wounding 7. U.S.-led coalition warplanes killed 4 Daesh militants north of the city of Fallujah, which is held by the terror group. At least 43 people were killed in heavy fighting in Yemen between supporters of exiled President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi and the dominant Houthi militants. Clashes erupted ahead of UN-sponsored talks in Geneva next week aimed at ending a conflict that has drawn in Saudi Arabia and some of its allies on one side and the Houthis and former President Ali Abdullah Saleh on the other. Residents said warplanes from a Saudi-led coalition flew sorties against Houthi outposts north of Aden, killing 12 Houthi militants. Saudi-led airstrikes on Houthi fighters in the oil-producing Marib province also killed 10 Houthis. Israeli military forces shot and killed a Palestinian during a raid in the north of the occupied West Bank. The Israeli military said troops were in the town of Jenin as part of an operation against suspected militants when they saw a Palestinian preparing to throw a pipe bomb at them and shot him. Jenin residents and hospital officials said the 23-year-old Palestinian was killed in the early morning raid. They said there had been no wider confrontations with the Israeli troops who left the city after the killing. The Israeli military authorities said the Jenin raid was not coordinated in advance with the Palestinian security forces. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi ordered security forces to strengthen their presence at key sites, including ancient monuments. His order came after 4 Egyptians were wounded in an attack at a tourist site in Luxor. No group claimed responsibility. Islamist militants have killed hundreds of police and soldiers over the past 2 years. The state news agency MENA said Sisi affirmed that such hideous attacks will not deter the commitment of the Egyptian people or state to combat terrorism in all its forms. And finally, a quick look at the weather. Chilly tonight in hilly areas, but fair in other regions. Tomorrow, mild conditions are forecast in much of the country, but it will be hot in the Jordan Valley and Aqaba with northwesterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect pleasant conditions tonight, but a hot day tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour announced that working hours for civil service employees during the holy months of Ramadan will be from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. In a communique, the Prime Minister said the circular excludes employees whose department require them to work longer hours. The Prime Minister called on all ministries and official departments and private institutions to maintain the sanctity of the holy month. And to end the news, here's a recap of our top stories. His Majesty the King leaves on a working trip to Kazakhstan, where he will take part in the Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions. Jordan celebrates the anniversaries of independence, His Majesty the King's coronation, Army Day, and the Great Arab Revolt. And a coalition of Syrian rebels seizes more territory from government forces. And with this we come to an end. I'm Farah Ajluni. Thank you for watching and have a good night.